Amara Taylor's life was once simple. A CIA agent with a spotless record, she worked tirelessly to uphold justice, believing in the cause she was fighting for. But everything changed the day she was framed. The night started like any other. She was deep into a covert mission, tracking a weapons smuggling ring that had been operating in the city for months. She had followed the trail from one location to the next, always one step behind the criminals she was hunting. But then, something went wrong. That it wasn't supposed to be a dangerous mission. She wasn't supposed to get caught in the middle of a web of corruption that reached deeper than she could have ever imagined. That it started with a routine check, the kind of surveillance that had become second nature. Amara had planted a few hidden cameras, eavesdropped on conversations, and gathered enough intel to bring down the operation. But it wasn't just the criminals who were dangerous. There was a mole in her team. Someone within the CIA who was working with the criminals, feeding them intel and covering up their tracks. She didn't realize it at first, but one moment of hesitation, one small mistake, was all it took to expose the truth. Amara was arrested. But the charges weren't what she expected. She was accused of planting evidence in the very case she had been investigating. The twist? Her own colleagues, the ones she had trusted, turned on her. They framed her for the crime she had been trying to stop. As she was handcuffed and taken into custody, her heart pounded with disbelief. How could this happen? How could her own team betray her like this? The FBI was called in, but they too were compromised. Amara's case was already marked. She was guilty before she even had a chance to defend herself. No one would listen. No one would believe her side of the story. Her mind raced as the trial loomed. There had to be a way out. She had to clear her name. She wasn't going to go down without a fight. Amara sat alone in her cell, the weight of the world pressing down on her. But she wasn't one to sit idly by. She knew the system was corrupt, and if she wanted to survive, she had to play by her own rules. Despite being locked away, Amara had the skills to gather intel, and she used every resource available to her. She couldn't rely on anyone else. She had to be smart. She had to outwit the people who were trying to destroy her. Malik, an old friend from her time at the CIA, had always been there for her. He was a hacker, a genius with technology. When he heard about her arrest, he knew something was off. He dug into the records, searching for any connection between Amara's arrest and the shady cops who had been involved in the operation she was investigating. What he uncovered was more than just a few dirty cops. The web of corruption stretched far beyond the city's police department. There were judges, city officials, even businessmen, people with power who had been getting away with their crimes for years. The smuggling operation was just the tip of the iceberg. Malik sent Amara encrypted messages, providing her with the information she needed. With each piece of intel she received, the puzzle started to come together. The conspiracy was bigger than she had ever imagined, but there were still questions. Who was behind it all? And why was she the one being targeted? As the days passed, Amara became more determined. She knew she had to get out of prison. She couldn't expose the truth from behind bars. So, she began working on a plan to escape. But time was running out, her trial date was fast approaching, and the evidence against her was damning. She had to act fast before the system swallowed her whole. Amara's escape wasn't easy. She had to rely on every ounce of her training, every skill she had learned over the years. But it wasn't just about getting out of prison, it was about taking down the people who had set her up. Malik had provided her with a wealth of information, names, locations, and documents that could expose the corruption at the heart of the city's justice system. Amara knew that if she was going to take them down, she had to go public. But she had to be careful. She couldn't trust anyone. With a new identity and a plan in place, Amara made her move. She used her time on the inside to gather the final pieces of the puzzle, carefully documenting every crime, every corrupt official. She knew she couldn't just go to the authorities, they were all compromised. Instead, she reached out to trusted allies in the media, passing along encrypted files that revealed the full extent of the conspiracy. It was a risky move, but it was the only way. The media erupted when the story broke. The press were all over it, demanding answers. Protests filled the streets as citizens rose up against the corrupt system that had failed them for so long. And when the mayor made a public statement, promising full cooperation with federal investigations, Amara knew the tide was turning, but she wasn't done yet. The arrests started to come in. High-ranking police officers were taken into custody, along with judges and city officials. The system was crumbling. But there was one thing Amara knew: the battle wasn't over. The people who had framed her were still out there. Months had passed since the corruption was exposed. The city had undergone a transformation. The police force was restructured. New leadership was put in place. And while the corrupt officials were being prosecuted, Amara's name had been cleared, but she was nowhere to be found. It wasn't that she didn't want the credit. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about the cause, about justice. And now that the truth had come out, she knew her work wasn't finished. Amara had disappeared into the shadows. She couldn't afford to be a target again. There were still powerful people who would stop at nothing to silence her, and she wasn't going to let them, but her disappearance wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter. Her legacy lived on in the people who fought for justice, who took up her cause. Amara Taylor had become a symbol. A name that inspired others to stand up against the system. She had proven that one person could make a difference, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And though she had vanished from the public eye, Amara knew one thing for sure: the storm she had started was far from over. Amara Taylor's disappearance was not an end, but a beginning. The streets had quieted down after the chaos, but the change she had sparked was undeniable. The city's justice system had been reformed, corrupt officials were in prison, and the media had hailed her as a hero. But for Amara, the fight wasn't over, it was just in a different form. Her legacy lived on in the actions of those who continued her work. She had shown the world that one voice, one person, could bring about seismic change. And that was the most powerful thing she could leave behind. Though the city had healed, the shadow of those who had once controlled it still loomed. Amara knew that the fight for justice would always be ongoing. But she was prepared for whatever came next. She had made her mark, and now it was time for others to pick up where she left off. And in the quietest corners of the city, a few whispered her name, remembering her as the woman who had taken down the corrupt, and walked away victorious.